A narrow footpath winds across the pale limestone hills above the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. The ground is dry beneath your feet. Wind pushes fine grains of dust through cracks in weathered rock. Inside one of these caves, sunlight reaches only a few feet before fading into darkness, where ancient jars once rested untouched for centuries. Their clay surfaces were rough, their lids were sealed. Hidden inside were manuscripts that survived empires, wars, and generations of silence. Not decoration, not symbolism. Real texts preserved by one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. Among the writings discovered near these caves were documents that transformed the modern understanding of ancient Judaism and the world in which Christianity first emerged. They revealed that ideas once assumed to be unusual had already been circulating long before many familiar biblical books reached their final form. One of the most fascinating of those ancient works is the Book of Enoch. Although it was never included in the biblical canon of most Jewish and Christian traditions, it survived in complete form through the Ethiopian tradition, while fragments of its Aramaic text were later identified among the Dead Sea Scrolls. That discovery confirmed something scholars had debated for generations. The Book of Enoch was not a late invention. It belonged to a much older world, a world filled with expectations about divine justice, heavenly courts, rebellious spiritual beings, and a future in which history would not end with a single dramatic event, but unfold through carefully ordered stages established by God. Most people have heard about a final judgment. It is one of the most familiar themes in the Bible. But when you begin reading the Book of Enoch carefully, another pattern begins to appear. Instead of describing judgment as one isolated event, the text repeatedly presents God acting in successive phases. Certain beings are judged before humanity. Certain places are prepared before the nations are gathered. Certain heavenly decisions appear to take place before history reaches its ultimate conclusion. Whether these passages describe separate judgments or different aspects of the same divine process has been debated for centuries, but the structure of the book invites careful attention. In the next several minutes, you'll see what the text actually says, how its earliest surviving manuscripts compare with later traditions, and why its description of judgment has continued to attract readers across generations. If ancient manuscripts, forgotten writings, and the history surrounding the Book of Enoch fascinate you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was preserved, debated, and sometimes left outside the boundaries of familiar scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. When the Book of Enoch is read alongside other Second Temple Jewish writings, its vision of judgment appears remarkably detailed. Instead of presenting one single moment that resolves everything at once, it describes heavenly decrees, imprisoned rebellious beings, the vindication of the righteous, and the final renewal of creation as parts of a much larger sequence. Whether every reader reaches the same conclusion is another matter. But the text itself deserves to be examined on its own terms, because its pages preserve one of the most expansive visions of divine judgment to survive from the ancient world, inviting us to explore whether its sequence points toward more than one decisive act of judgment before history reaches its ultimate end. The oldest surviving portions of the Book of Enoch do not come from medieval copies or recent translations. They come from fragile Aramaic fragments recovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, preserved for centuries in the dry caves overlooking the Dead Sea. Those fragments confirmed that the book was already circulating among Jewish communities during the Second Temple period, long before the birth of Jesus. Complete copies later survived in the ancient Ethiopian tradition, while Greek quotations and additional textual witnesses helped scholars compare different versions across centuries. Together, these manuscripts reveal that the Book of Enoch was read seriously by communities deeply interested in prophecy, divine justice, and the future of creation. It was not treated as a casual writing. It belonged to a wider conversation about how God would deal with rebellion in both heaven and on earth. As the text unfolds, one feature becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Judgment is never described as a single, instantaneous event that begins and ends in one moment. Instead, the narrative moves through a sequence of divine actions. The first major acts of judgment fall not upon ordinary humanity, but upon the rebellious watchers, heavenly beings who abandoned their appointed place. According to the Book of Enoch, these beings crossed boundaries established by God, corrupted humanity with forbidden knowledge, and introduced violence that spread across the earth. Their sentence comes long before the final renewal of creation. They are bound, confined, and held under divine authority, while awaiting a future day when their ultimate punishment will be completed. The text presents this as an early act of judgment that takes place before history reaches its final conclusion. That sequence continues in remarkable detail. Enoch is shown visions of places prepared for future judgment, chambers reserved for different groups, and divisions that separate the righteous from the wicked, even before the last great reckoning. Mountains, valleys, rivers of fire, and heavenly courts appear repeatedly throughout the visions. Each scene builds upon the previous one. Nothing happens without order. Every decision follows another. Every sentence prepares the way for what comes next. Rather than collapsing everything into one dramatic ending, the Book of Enoch portrays God's justice unfolding according to a deliberate pattern that reaches across generations. This becomes even more noticeable in the so-called Book of Parables, where the figure often identified as the Son of Man appears as the one chosen to execute divine judgment. Kings, rulers, and powerful nations are summoned before God's throne, while the righteous receive vindication after enduring oppression. Yet even here, the text distinguishes between different moments of accountability. Some judgments concern rebellious spiritual beings. Others concern earthly kingdoms. Still others point toward the ultimate transformation of creation itself. The progression is careful, almost judicial, as though each phase must be completed before the next can begin. For many readers, this layered structure raises an important question. Could the Book of Enoch be describing a sequence of judgments rather than a single final event? The text does not always answer that question directly, and interpreters have reached different conclusions throughout history. But what remains clear is that Enoch consistently presents divine justice as an unfolding process. Every vision adds another piece. Every revelation expands the picture. By the time these early sections conclude, the reader is left with a framework in which judgment is not merely an ending. It is a series of carefully ordered acts that prepare the way for the final restoration of God's creation. The idea of successive judgments becomes even more striking when the Book of Enoch is read alongside other Jewish writings from the same general period. Rather than standing completely alone, many of its themes echo questions that were already shaping religious thought during the centuries before the New Testament. Ancient readers were asking how divine justice would unfold, when evil would finally be restrained, and what events would take place before the complete renewal of the world. The Book of Enoch offers one of the most detailed responses. It presents a timeline in which heaven acts before earth fully understands what is happening. Decisions are made in the heavenly court long before their consequences become visible in human history. The result is a picture of judgment that unfolds in stages instead of appearing all at once. One of the clearest examples appears in Enoch's repeated journeys through the heavenly realms. He is shown places that have already been prepared for future events. Some are described as prisons for rebellious spiritual beings. Others are places where human souls await the day when their cases will be brought forward. The imagery suggests separation before final sentencing. Certain groups are already confined. Others remain in expectation. The final resolution has not yet arrived, yet significant acts of judgment have already taken place. This pattern appears again and again throughout the visions. God's authority is never delayed by uncertainty. Every action follows a purpose that has already been established. The same sequence appears in the book's descriptions of the righteous. Their vindication does not simply begin at the end of history. Throughout Enoch's visions, They are seen as already known by God, already distinguished from the wicked, and already promised an inheritance that will eventually become visible. Their names are remembered. Their suffering is not ignored. While injustice may continue for a time in the world below, the heavenly perspective presented in the Book of Enoch shows that judgment has already begun in ways hidden from ordinary human sight. Heaven recognizes what earth has not yet witnessed. This perspective also helps explain why the Book of Enoch spends so much time describing heavenly records, appointed times, and carefully measured periods. Nothing unfolds by accident. Every rebellion carries consequences. Every act of faithfulness is remembered. The visions repeatedly emphasize that history moves according to an established order that cannot be altered by human power or earthly kingdoms. Even rulers who appear invincible remain subject to a greater authority. Their influence lasts only for the time permitted before divine justice reaches its appointed stage. In this framework, judgment is not simply punishment. It is the orderly restoration of justice according to a timetable that originates in heaven rather than on earth. When these themes are considered together, the central pattern becomes increasingly clear. The Book of Enoch consistently portrays judgment as progressive. First comes accountability for rebellious heavenly beings. Then comes the exposure of corruption among earthly rulers and nations. Finally comes the universal renewal that brings history to its intended conclusion. Readers and religious traditions have differed over exactly how these visions should be interpreted, yet the literary structure itself remains remarkably consistent. The text moves from one act of divine justice to another, each preparing the way for what follows. Whether viewed as prophecy, symbolic vision, or theological reflection, the Book of Enoch invites readers to see judgment not as one isolated event, but as an unfolding process in which every stage reveals another dimension of God's justice before the final restoration of creation. As the Book of Enoch moves deeper into its visions, the focus gradually shifts from the judgment of rebellious heavenly beings to the accountability of humanity itself. The transition is deliberate. The corruption introduced by the Watchers does not remain confined to the spiritual realm. According to the text, it spreads across the earth, shaping kingdoms, violence, injustice, and human pride. The consequences become visible in every generation, yet the response of heaven remains measured rather than immediate. The visions repeatedly suggest that God allows history to reach its appointed point before each stage of judgment unfolds. That pattern is one of the defining features of the entire book. Justice is certain, but it arrives according to divine timing, rather than human expectation. Enoch is then shown scenes in which earthly rulers, powerful leaders, and those who have oppressed others are summoned before the presence of the Most High. Their authority, which once appeared permanent, suddenly proves temporary. Thrones cannot protect them. Wealth cannot speak on their behalf. Military strength disappears before the authority of heaven. The Book of Enoch describes these moments with remarkable consistency. Every earthly power is measured against a higher standard. Every hidden action is brought into the light. Nothing remains concealed once the appointed time arrives. This vision of judgment extends beyond individual lives and reaches entire nations, suggesting that history itself is accountable before the Creator. At the same time, the righteous are portrayed very differently. Throughout the visions, they are not described as forgotten or abandoned during periods of suffering. Instead, they are presented as people whose endurance has already been seen by God. Their faithfulness is remembered even when justice seems delayed on earth. The text repeatedly contrasts temporary human success with lasting divine approval. Those who appeared insignificant during their lifetime are ultimately honored, while those who seemed untouchable discover that their influence was only temporary. This reversal forms one of the central themes running through the later sections of the Book of Enoch. Human judgment often favors power, but divine judgment looks beyond appearances and weighs every action with complete knowledge. Another important feature of these visions is the repeated emphasis on books, records, and remembrance. The language suggests that nothing is overlooked. Every deed, whether hidden or public, belongs within a larger account known to God. This imagery appears in different forms throughout Jewish apocalyptic literature, but the Book of Enoch develops it with unusual detail. The heavenly court does not act without knowledge. Every judgment rests upon complete understanding. The result is a picture of justice that is neither impulsive nor arbitrary. It is careful, comprehensive, and perfectly ordered. Each decision fits within a sequence that has been established long before human history reaches its conclusion. By this point, the overall pattern has become increasingly difficult to ignore. The Book of Enoch does not rush toward a single dramatic ending. Instead, it unfolds through successive moments of accountability that build upon one another. First comes the restraint of rebellious spiritual powers, then the exposure of corruption among humanity. After that comes the vindication of the righteous and the removal of oppressive rule. Only then does the text direct the reader toward the complete renewal of creation under God's eternal authority. Whether every interpreter understands these visions in exactly the same way remains a matter of ongoing discussion, but the literary structure itself is remarkably consistent. Each judgment prepares the next. Each revelation expands the previous one, and together they form a carefully ordered vision in which the final restoration stands as the culmination of a process that has already begun, long before the last judgment reaches its ultimate fulfillment. As the final visions of the Book of Enoch approach, the perspective expands beyond individual people and earthly kingdoms to embrace the destiny of all creation. The earlier scenes of imprisoned watchers, accountable rulers, and vindicated righteous believers now begin to converge into a larger picture. Every previous judgment appears to serve a purpose beyond punishment alone. The text repeatedly points toward restoration. Evil is restrained so that righteousness can endure. Corruption is exposed so that truth may stand openly. Every act of divine judgment prepares the way for a world that reflects God's original intention. Instead of presenting history as a series of disconnected events, the Book of Enoch portrays it as a carefully ordered movement toward complete renewal. One of the most remarkable features of these closing sections is the confidence with which they describe the certainty of God's plan. Human empires rise and disappear. Generations pass away. Nations gain influence only to lose it again. Yet the heavenly perspective never changes. The visions consistently remind the reader that history is not controlled by the strongest kingdom or the most powerful ruler. Behind every visible event stands a divine purpose, moving steadily toward its appointed conclusion. From Enoch's viewpoint, what appears chaotic on earth is already understood within the heavenly court. The timing may remain hidden from humanity, but the outcome is never uncertain. This broader perspective also helps explain why the Book of Enoch continues to attract attention today. Readers often focus on its descriptions of angels, heavenly journeys, or extraordinary visions, yet its deepest concern is justice. Again and again, the text returns to the same question: how will God finally deal with evil without overlooking the suffering of the righteous? The answer unfolds gradually rather than instantly. First comes the restraint of corruption. Then comes accountability for those who have abused power. After that comes the public vindication of those who remained faithful despite opposition. Only after these stages does the vision move toward the complete renewal of creation, where righteousness is no longer threatened by violence or rebellion. This sequence gives the entire book a sense of progression that distinguishes it from a simple description of one final event. Many readers also notice how closely this progression reflects the larger biblical theme that God's work often unfolds in stages. Throughout Scripture, promises are announced long before they are fulfilled. Covenants develop across generations. Prophecies reveal future events piece by piece instead of all at once. In that wider context, the structure of the Book of Enoch appears less isolated and more consistent with a pattern already familiar in biblical literature. Whether one accepts the book as authoritative, historical, or simply valuable for understanding ancient Jewish thought, its vision of successive acts of divine justice remains one of its most distinctive characteristics. By the time these visions draw near their conclusion, the central message has become increasingly clear. The Book of Enoch does not portray God's judgment as a single moment appearing without preparation. Instead, it presents a carefully ordered process in which every stage accomplishes a specific purpose before the next begins. The rebellious powers face judgment. Human oppression is exposed. The faithful are vindicated. Creation itself is renewed. Each act builds upon the one before it, forming a continuous picture of divine justice that moves steadily toward its final completion. It is this layered sequence that has encouraged generations of readers to revisit the Book of Enoch, searching its pages for a deeper understanding of how ancient believers imagined the unfolding of God's judgment across both heaven and earth. The closing chapters of the Book of Enoch leave the reader with a perspective that stretches beyond a single generation and even beyond the boundaries of human history. By the time Enoch's visions reach their conclusion, the repeated pattern has become unmistakable. Divine justice unfolds with purpose, order, and perfect knowledge. Nothing happens before its appointed time, yet nothing escapes the attention of the one who governs both heaven and earth. The rebellious spiritual powers are confronted. Human kingdoms are weighed according to their deeds. The righteous are remembered even when they appear forgotten by the world. Finally, creation itself is brought into the peace and order that the visions have anticipated from the very beginning. Whether one approaches the Book of Enoch as sacred scripture within the Ethiopian tradition, as an influential Jewish work from the Second Temple period, or as an important historical text that shaped early religious thought, its message remains remarkably consistent. Justice is not random. It unfolds according to a divine plan that no earthly power can prevent. This is one reason the Book of Enoch has continued to receive attention from historians, biblical scholars, and readers interested in the origins of Jewish and Christian ideas. The discovery of Aramaic fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls demonstrated that the work was circulating centuries before many had once assumed. That evidence changed the conversation surrounding the book. Instead of viewing it as a much later composition, scholars recognized that it reflected beliefs and expectations already present during a formative period of Jewish history. While different religious communities have reached different conclusions regarding its authority, few now dispute its historical importance. It provides a valuable window into the intellectual and spiritual world from which many later ideas about angels, judgment, resurrection, and the coming kingdom would emerge. The question that continues to capture the attention of so many readers is not simply whether the Book of Enoch describes judgment. It clearly does. The more intriguing question is how that judgment unfolds. Throughout the text, the sequence remains deliberate. One act prepares the next. Heavenly rebellion is addressed before the final renewal of creation. Human corruption is exposed before lasting righteousness is established. The vindication of the faithful becomes part of a larger movement that ultimately leads toward a restored world. This progression has encouraged countless readers to compare Enoch's visions with passages found elsewhere in ancient Jewish literature and the New Testament, searching for points of connection, while recognizing that interpretations continue to differ across traditions. At the same time, the Book of Enoch offers a reminder that ancient religious writings often invite careful reading rather than quick conclusions. Its symbolic language, vivid imagery, and visionary structure challenge readers to slow down and consider how each scene relates to the larger picture. The power of the book does not rest only in extraordinary descriptions of heavenly journeys or cosmic events. It also lies in its insistence that justice has meaning, that evil has limits, and that history moves toward accountability even when the present moment appears uncertain. Those themes have allowed the text to remain relevant for centuries, regardless of the debates surrounding its place within different biblical canons, and so the journey returns to the same silent landscape where it began. The pale limestone hills still rise above the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. Dry wind still moves across the desert, carrying fine dust through narrow openings in the ancient caves. Those weathered chambers remain quiet, yet they once protected words that crossed thousands of years before reaching the modern world. The clay jars are no longer sealed, but the questions preserved within those manuscripts continue to invite careful examination. Among them is the enduring vision presented by the Book of Enoch, that divine judgment unfolds according to God's perfect order, advancing step by step until every act of justice has reached its appointed completion and creation itself stands renewed before its Creator.